morning, ladies and gentlemen. Welcome to Spanglish Sports World on the Spanglish World Network and Single TV channel 250 and 249. I want to remind you that Single TV, to please go to the iOS and respective iOS and Android stores to download the application of Single TV, where you can watch all our programming as well as the excellent programming that Single TV has to offer. After you download it and you have enjoyed it for a while, please return to those stores and leave us a comment and a rating with regards to the use of the application and the programming that you are seeing. We want to always know if there is something else that you would like to see in regards to the programming. Single TV can also be acquired through Google Chromecast, Amazon Fire and Amazon Fire TV sticks, Roku and Roku sticks, and all TVs 2016 and forward. So I'm just waiting for my partner to join us, Mr. Ari Shapiro, and let's start this morning in the sports world with some news coming out of Major League Baseball, and we'll start touching on the what is going on in baseball. And we are going to start with the news about the different experimental rules that they are testing across the minor leagues in order to get probably bring them up to the major league level after a while. So here is the rules that they are starting to pursue. We'll start with the double hook rule. An intriguing idea, to say the least. The idea for this experimental rule is very simple. And here he is, Mr. Ari Shapiro, partner in crime. Mr. Shapiro, how are you doing, sir? Good morning.
Good morning, Ed. How you doing, my friend? How are you today?
I am doing great. It's a great Saturday morning here in the city of Toronto under a complete lockdown, as we say.
That's the term we're using to describe it?
Well, I am using a simplistic terms to understand what I'm not supposed to do.
Yeah, well, you and I are in the same boat, and I think so are countless other people, by the way, who are waking up this morning living in Ontario and asking themselves, what on earth is going on? It's very surreal, isn't it? Especially when you have sports going on at the same time, and then you start asking yourself, what exactly is reality here? You know, it's a sobering reality to wake up this morning when you've got these kinds of decisions made by government. You know, this is certainly nothing I've seen in my lifetime, you know.
But now it gets more interesting because there is no route of escape. You cannot go into the next province either.
So think about it.
Now we are really under lockdown.
Absolutely. Before it was like, we'll call them cosmetic lockdowns. They weren't actual lockdowns. They were more like philosophical lockdowns. The theory being that the government was trying to convince people what best practices were, and people weren't listening, right? Like, don't fool yourself. The reason we've reached this point is because a substantial number of people were not doing their share and part to make sure that we get healthy and move on. So like any parent that the government assumes the role of in this kind of situation, this is, in their estimation, the best thing to do. I don't know. Do you think this is the best thing to do? Have you ever been part of something like this where you've had a government sit down and tell you that you not only can't go outside your home, but if you do, there are consequences, and there will be many consequences, you know? Look, I've known you many years, Ed, and you know me. I'm very cynical about these things because until you show me the real meat behind your intentions, like what are you trying to achieve, I'm going to question it. And I'm going to question giving increased, enhanced police authority in this situation, because what is it going to lead to? Like, what are you trying to do? Are you trying to keep people in line? Are you trying to raise revenue for the province, which you know well, right? It's what, a $700 ticket that a police officer can give you if you don't provide them with the information. That's serious business, you know. That's think about the number of people who are going to be indignant and say, I don't need to tell you what I'm doing. Well, here's a ticket. Pay it, fight it,
Well,
get a lawyer.
I, and we know how reliable the OPP and the Toronto Police Department are in enforcing those. They have to
There,
report.
there are many wonderful men and women who work for our police forces, and I have no doubt that for them this must be a real headache. I mean, this must be an existential headache for them, because think about it, their job is to enforce the law, right? And in this case, whatever the law is more of an edict. So there's a lot of room for interpretation as to what you do if you get stopped, right? Like, you don't know what to expect. It'll be interesting to speak with people who do get pulled over by the police as a result of this, and then further understand what they do in this situation, because nobody really knows yet, right? This just started, it's fresh, it came into effect, what, as of midnight?
Now, but one of the things that they didn't explain with this rule, they applied it to motor vehicles, but is that the same for bus transportation?
No, apparently it's only motor vehicles, which means if I grab my little small plane that I have in my imaginary hangar out back in my backyard, I could fly over to another province. I mean, my understanding is they haven't even enforced this in the air, which means that we're still having people coming in from other provinces and international flights, while at the same token telling the people who live here that they can't leave the provincial confines, their home. It's fascinating times. And I love the escapism of sports, but sometimes the reality of life bleeds into it, and then all of a sudden you're not even sure what you got anymore.
Now, I have a concern now because, as you know, hockey's been played in the city of Toronto. The players are not staying in a hotel; the players are staying at home. So how do they get to the stadium? By the police and telling them you cannot go to work.
Well, and contextualize this, Ed. This only happened because the numbers are off the charts, and the fact that right now I could have some kind of heart problem, you could have some kind of physical problem where you terribly hurt yourself, and if you were to go to your local hospital, my understanding is you wouldn't find an ICU bed if you need one. You wouldn't find intensive care available. That's why this is being done. This is being done because we are at capacity, and everything will stop unless we free up some of the resources. How do we free up the resources in the estimation of this government? Just to keep everybody at home, like literally find a way to keep everybody at home, get the numbers down, and away you go. I have spoken with a lot of people, as you know, on my show, and I do a lot of journalism initiatives where I talk to people to understand what's happening around the world. I haven't seen anything like this. I mean, we've seen lockdowns. We've seen some countries where they literally have been very, very extensive in making sure that everyone follows the law. But this has happened so quickly overnight that it makes you wonder what's really going on. Because when a government starts panicking like this and gives enhanced powers to authority figures, it's going down a slippery slope. There is nothing good to be culled from this. If anything, we're just going to have more reasons to be angst-riddled, frustrated, and looking over our shoulders, because now if I go down to my local town to pick up some eggs and milk, there's a chance that somebody will pull me over, look at my extensive, bearded visage and ask me, where are you coming from? Where are you going? What are you doing? Where do you live? Very uncomfortable questions when you live in a democracy like Canada.
Yeah, I mean, and I have experienced lockdowns of this severe, but it's been for political reasons.
That's
So,
right.
when you come from Central to South America or East Asia, where there is so-called democracies that are enforced by military coups or military committees, they put you under strenuous lockdowns, but not the way it has been enforced in Ontario. I, in a way, I don't disagree with the measure, It's how the measure was implemented that I don't agree with.
I agree. That's
The measure had to come. The measure had to come because people abuse the system. When if we had, and one of the things that I always said was that if we had done this from day one, we wouldn't be in the situation that we are in right
no,
now.
no, no. That's what we needed. We needed a steady hand. We needed a government that was more like an old-fashioned parent, understanding that if you don't put the fear of consequence into people, there's a good chance you'll continue seeing the same habits, right? We saw the super spreading events. They were splashed across every major journalism outlet. You could check the Globe and Mail, the National Post, the Star, the Toronto Sun. All of their journalists have been fastidiously working hard to point out how many people are breaking it. I mean, a few days ago, we had a developer throwing a surprise party with a scantily clad dancer. It's very salacious stuff because people want to read it, right? You pay attention to the really extreme examples. But what we're not hearing is how it's affecting the elderly living in their long-term retirement homes anymore, because now we just assume that that is what it is, and it was a terrible tragedy. But we've also learned now that young people are suffering mightily as a result of this reality, not just because of their own physical health, but children are losing parents. You know, there's a statistic that in France alone, the average French child growing up in that country has lost at least one parent out of 100. Out of 100 different children, at least one has lost a parent. And you know, you're a father. You understand that there can't be any greater trauma than a child losing their guardian. So the government stepped in and they're trying to be this glorified guardian. They're telling us what to do, how to do it, and so on and so forth. But they don't have the credibility. That's the problem. They just don't. You know, this is a populist government. You know, without getting into the ideological view, and everybody has an opinion about politics still, to me, we're beyond politics now. Now we're just in the realm of survival and public health. And unfortunately, in this province, we have, as you said so brilliantly, it should have been done from the start. And because it hasn't, we're doing this bizarre piecemeal approach, which is culminating in a lot of frustrated people. And I don't see how this is going to change anything. Because you know the nature of children. If you make something taboo, if you tell your child that you can't do something, the first thing you're going to have to deal with is the reality that at some point they're going to try to do it. Otherwise, they wouldn't if you hadn't have told them. So declaring this is how it has to be, and these are the rules you have to follow without knowing how they're going to be enforced. There are going to be a lot of people who are going to test those rules. We are going to see some pretty bad examples. Kind of, I think Ed will see a defiance very similar to what happened with Adamson Barbecue. Remember when Adam Skelly was in the news? He did that because he knew that by flaunting it, that he would get sympathy from the fringes of society. He raised over, $400,000 on GoFundMe. You're going to see a lot of people complaining and saying, hey, look, I wasn't doing anything wrong. I'm the victim. And through a combination of victimhood, through a combination of virtue signaling and moral relativism that goes on in society between left and right, this is going to be, I think, a disaster for a while. This is going to be a very convoluted, mixed up society of well-intentioned people and those who feel the need to cast blame somewhere. That's just how it is.
Yeah, I mean, and I have to, every time, and as you know, every time that I end a show, I ended up with the same message: stay at home, stay with your family, stay safe.
It's a great message.
You
It's a
know,
long message. It's epic. It means you care. You care about what you tell your viewers at the end of the day. You want them to stay healthy. You don't want them to play fast and loose with the virus and the pandemic.
and I've had the reality of, I have at home a child that is autistic, and it's hard, and it's going to be harder now with this new rule, because he climbs the walls. He needs to be outdoors. So now he has taken, as a result of all during this pandemic, he has taken a new attitude, and he has become, let's say, I want to be farmer in my backyard. So I have more vegetable plantations now than I ever wanted to get to. Uh,
You're finally going to enjoy the wonders of organic peppers and cucumbers and tomatoes
oh,
and listen, micro farming. Micro farming is one of the most noble things you can do, right?
yes, but
Because
from an 8 year old, from a 10-year-old child is not the thing that you want to see.
no, no, you don't. Especially and autistic children by nature need space in the sense that they need the ability to feel that they aren't in an
Confined.
environment, and confined in an environment that isn't conducive to growth and giving a chance to be around people. And people don't. I think society doesn't understand the consequences of that. I have friends who have autistic children. One good friend of mine has an autistic child that is in his 40s and has been in a facility for quite a while, but now he's living with them because he's fearful of leaving him behind. That's another consideration people forgot. There are all sorts of environments that you can find people with autism in that right now that support system is buckling. It's a difficult time. We're all under a great deal of pressure and stress as it is, but for autistic children in particular, it's a challenging thing, and you're to be admired for it because it's not easy to be the parent of an autistic child, especially during a pandemic.
No, it's funny because you try to my the solution to while we were able to go out was long car rides,
Mm.
not going down anywhere or being in contact with anybody, but it was the family. I would drive from Toronto to Mississauga on Steeles Avenue and then come back just to give him that avenue that he's outside. But now with the new rule,
Ed, it's cathartic, isn't it? It's therapeutic to be able to jump into an automobile and just drive around up in the country or drive around on different neighborhoods. I agree with you. This is the biggest, I think, challenge now of having these new rules over the next, what is it, 6 weeks of containment, is
yeah,
recognizing the fact that for some people, just taking a nice idle drive somewhere is important. Giving them a chance to feel like they have some control, right? When you travel, you feel like you have a little bit of control in this life. You can choose a direction and you can go and enjoy it. You can go to a park, you can go get something to eat, you can share time with a friend. With all these things taken away or under scrutiny, I worry. I worry about the way people will respond to this. I'm not worried about the police doing their job. I think many brave women and men associated with law enforcement will do their best to keep things in line. Remember, this is about containment. This is about stopping the spread of a horrible disease that we've completely lost control of in this province. My concern is how people will react to this because people have been through a lot. It's been now, this is going on a fourth wave. How many waves are we going to have? 6 waves? Is it going to be a 6-part miniseries? Is it going to be
well,
2 seasons on Netflix? What are we talking about here? We don't even know when this is over. So to now tell people, guess what? It's DEFCON. We have to use the nuclear option. We have to keep you at home and question if you go out and about. That's a big problem, Ed. That's going to philosophically lead to, I can't even imagine
well,
what'll happen.
and I can tell you that this is not going to end today or
No.
or next day. I mean, I was looking at the news in Europe, and when you have the European Union that has ordered now from Pfizer supplies every 3 months until the year 2026, they are asking Pfizer to provide them with 50 million vaccines every 3 months until 2026. So that gives you the idea that they know something that we don't know. Uh, and
And that's what happens when you make rules like this overnight without details, right? That's
yeah,
usually a sign because if I know something is it's this is why we love sports. When we know something isn't working in sports, we have analytics and experience and history to show us what the next course of action is. The problem with many governments across, especially in the Western world, I'm finding, is that they have neither of those resources or any of them. They don't have all the information, and if they do, they're keeping it from us. And I agree with you. And look, we already live in a very conspiratorial minded era where technology gives people the ability to go down a rabbit hole and then emerge from it saying, my God, I think things are a lot worse than what's being told. Do I think there is a sinister conspiracy in play here in the Ontario government? No. What I think is that they were caught completely unprepared. And as you said, they did not get a handle on this. So now they find themselves realizing that the only way that they can stem this rush of 10,000 infections a month is to tell us, stay home. And if you go about lollygagging, we will pull you over and we will ask you questions. Again, the very act of empowering law enforcement in the Western world to do that is literally the opposite of why you live in the West. People don't come to the Western world so that they can have this kind of treatment. This is very synonymous with traditional Eastern European and Asian countries. It's very, very extraordinary time, truly, I think, on a socioeconomic perspective and politically.
So I want to drift away from this topic,
Let's do it.
but keep focusing on, and I just want to touch on a political story because although it's not related to sport, in a sense, is the end of an era for a country in the Caribbean called Cuba. The end of an era, as Raúl Castro, the older brother of Fidel, has now officially stepped down 66 decades after it started in Cuba. And I just wanted to get your opinion on what you think might happen as a result of this, because the stronghold and the idea that the Castros controlled that country for so long now opens the door for civil unrest in a country that is plagued by this pandemic as well.
Not just plagued by it, but a sad reminder, I think, to anyone who's a United States citizen or anyone who lives in North America of what could have been, right? I mean, Cuba is such a fascinating country to me because it's almost been like history's reminder of what happens when you think you can just walk into a situation and change it ideologically, right? Anybody who follows history understands that you can't look at American 20th century politics without finding it intertwined with the fate and destiny of Cuba. Not just because the America failed, that North America failed to grow closer to the extraordinary little indomitable island nation, because really the Cuban people, by all accounts, I've never been to the country myself, but speaking with people who've either visited for purposes of tourism or have family members there, I always hear the same thing. It's an extraordinary culture of people who, just like us, want to be able to enjoy living in the West. But because it's become this politicized pawn, because it was a struggle between communism and presumable democracy, I was always fascinated by the stories that a lot of pivotal moments were unfolding on this little island nation, right? Not just the initial Bay of Pigs invasion, but the Cuban Missile Crisis. I mean, when you have a missile crisis named after your country, you know you're doing something interesting, something significant. And to know that the Castros were, able to hold on to power as long as they have, it's social conditioning for multiple generations. So now they realize a couple of things. One, that their leadership has faded, that it's not what it used to be. And two, that unless they form strategic partnerships with other countries that are going to help them, they're just going to be an abandoned island. I feel like they're marooned a bit, don't you? You feel that Cuba is kind of left out in the international politics realm. And that to me is a surprise now, because there's so much that can be done there if you have a right diplomacy, the right kind of diplomatic partnership. Who's their best friend? Who's Cuba's best friend in the world today, do you think?
I don't think there is one.
I don't think so either. I think they've been ostracized from the international community. They've been forgotten just simply because of other priorities in this world.
I mean, there was, I'm not, and we to go back to the Obama administration with when democracy talks started to happen, and it happened to be back. The reason is those conversations started because, again, sport brought it to them. The idea of not punishing the families of the ball players to America or to Canada because the families were being attacked because their sons are now playing in Major League Baseball. So that kind of happened, and Obama said, "Okay, let's talk about steps to move you towards democracy again." And I guess in a certain way that it skipped a presidency because, as we know, President Trump did kind of like Cuban politics, or didn't find it interesting, and he just completely forgot about the whole scenario. And now Biden comes into the picture, and now we are starting to get back into that scenario of what Obama left over. And I think Raul Castro said, I don't want to go into history as the bad guy. I might as well step away and let somebody else feel the wrath of what's going to happen. Because, as we know, Raul Castro is is in his late 80s now, and he wants to live the remainder of his days in peace.
It's like the head of the family stepping down because he or she understands that the future is bleak. It's not some kind of prosperous future where you can just hand off the reins of power and hope that there's prosperity. From a sports perspective, I loved Cuba as being the focal point of those inspirational stories of athletes who would defect from the country and become successful in the West. And I found it always interesting that with baseball, some of the most fascinating stories come from those countries that produce such wondrous talent, right? Like not just Cuba, but if you think about Puerto Rico and Venezuela. It's funny I say Puerto Rico because Puerto Rico is part of the United States of America, but only in symbolism, not in functionality, as we saw in the last couple of years in history shown us. But when you hear about all these places with ball players in particular coming over and becoming successful, you also get the strange and ugly reality of how many times have you heard of kidnappings and crimes being committed when they try to go back to that country. These are very unstable places in the world that I think get glamorized by the West, and we forget that there's just such a tragic human element there. Cuba to me is a small island that should have great diplomatic ties with this big continent that's right on their front porch. And yet I agree with you. It's a continent. It seems to be a continuation of policies not designed to help them prosper, but in some ways to help them feel guilty that they didn't agree to certain arrangements previously under old stewards. And, Fidel Castro is an epic figure in history as a revolutionary. But the fact is, he was born out of a revolution that was caused largely because of another country interfering in the destiny of that island. And that's what's fascinating, is to see how after all these decades it's unfolded where they find themselves today. I always thought that things would get better over time. With the coronavirus, with the pandemic in particular, so many places in the world that were trending in directions where they could be prosperous are now finding themselves friendless and frustrated and without any kind of financial or existential support to get them through the day. It's a tough thing. It really is with Cuba.
So, as you were coming in, I was talking the politics of baseball, technically, with the rule changes and what's experimenting with, and looking at the different rules that are running through the minor league system, which I find interesting. Let's put it that way.
You use the word interesting. No, throw me some that are making you scratch your head, because I'm with you. I think some of these rule changes are absolutely out of left field, pardon the pun. They just don't make sense.
So let's start with the first rule, the double hook rule, which is as we know, the double hook rule is the DH rule, the universal DH that they want to implement in the National League, which will throw a curve to the National League, the way the National League game has been played for the last 100 years or so. I still like the way it works. I like the DH rule in the American League because it has been here and we have learned to appreciate it. But if you look at the game that is playing in the National League with the strategic changes that you can make, that you can throw a pitcher in the middle of the inning into the outfield and bring another pitcher in to face somebody else, that makes it exciting. It's strategy. It's actually putting the game to a different level. It makes the managers actually think the game of baseball.
It makes it feel more organic.
Yeah.
It makes it feel like it's being played the way it was meant to be played. And this is coming from growing up with a designated hitter as an integral part of my baseball life. The first time I was introduced to the Blue Jays, when I must have been about 8 or 9 years old, was being a huge fan of who did they have in that role at the time that I really liked? Cliff Johnson used to DH quite a bit. And then later on, as we enjoyed competitive baseball, the classic kind of Paul Molitor at DH, or using Dave Winfield sometimes at DH. You could mix and match. I don't know, Ed. I think that if there's any hope for this game, it has to be consistency and keeping things trending in a way that people appreciate. And you grew up with enjoying the National League. I always found it kind of strange. I always thought functionally it was a big mistake. I thought to myself, look, if you're going to have a baseball league comprised of, say, 30 teams, it doesn't make sense for half of them to have a certain rule in place which is so profoundly different than the other half. Right? Because think about it. As a result of having the DH in the American League, it gained a reputation for being the league where you expect fireworks, where you expect a lot of offense. Whereas in the National League, the expectation was you had to be more strategic because you had to incorporate your pitcher as part of the experience. Do we need that today, considering the way the game has evolved? It's not a surprise that they would universalize the designated hitter. Will it take something away from the game for you and I? Absolutely. But not for somebody who's getting into baseball today. If anything, someone who's getting into baseball over the last couple of years is learning about the National League and wondering, why is the pitcher hitting? Why is he part of this process? I agree. It does keep the game organic, but look at where the analytics are heading. This is a game about throwing the ball as hard as you can and hitting it as hard as you can. And that's it. It's not about the nuanced way of figuring out how to steal 130 bases like Vince Coleman used to do, or being an effective bunter like Mookie Betts used to, not Mookie Betts, sorry, Mookie Wilson, I should have said. You looked at a player like Mookie Wilson, that's a player from the 80s and 90s. Mookie Wilson today would be just run out of the game. They wouldn't even need him. They'd be like, why do I need a light hitting bunter? Why do I need a pitcher who can bunt? I just want a heavy hitter who will get up there. I need a Rowdy Tellez. That's why Rowdy Tellez is being pushed so well, because in some kind of alternate universe, he's the Blue Jays' perfect designated hitter. Do I like the rule change? Not particularly. Do I see it as being an inevitable part of how baseball evolves? Yeah, it has to be. So I'm okay with it. I don't think it's the end of the world for National League teams to embrace a DH. If anything, it'll give more employment to hitters.
Well,
because pitchers are still going to be employed. If you're a good pitcher, you'll make it. So,
and I'll give you an example of why I like this rule, because yesterday, particularly in a game that the Dodgers, where the Dodgers beat the San Diego Padres 11-6 in 12, happened to be the pitcher that won the game was, believe it or not, David Price. Who will have ever thought that David Price would be winning a game in the 12th inning anywhere?
Ed, you're not that surprised. This is a guy who came in to relieve R.A. Dickey in like the 7th inning of a game in the ALCS back in like 2015. One of those moves that only David Price, he told somebody, put me in, coach. You know that, right? In the extreme games, he probably went to the manager. Who is it? Davey Johnson. He said, put me in. Put me in. I still have something to prove, which, by the way, he really does. I mean, it's a real shame what's happened to David Price's career, but I digress.
But the funny part is that he won in two ways, and not just as a pitcher, but he was the responsible party for winning the game, because he put a sacrifice fly into deep center field, and Machado scored the actual winning run, and that's what makes it more surprising that the RBI was put by a pitcher. You know,
And as a fan, I look at that and I say, wow, look at that nuanced outcome. Fantastic. But honestly, if I'm a fan of that team specifically or part of the ownership group, why am I putting David Price at the plate? Why am I risking that he might hurt himself while running? You see what I'm saying? The problem is
yeah.
that the AL has created this mentality of DH so that we can preserve pitchers too. But that's not how you grow up playing baseball. Whether you were a pitcher or hitter growing up as a young kid, you learned how to handle a bat. You learned how to run the bases. Like you said, when you're taught the fundamentals, you get fundamentally good baseball. And that's what you witnessed by David being responsible for the winning run and also being the winning pitcher. Now, that's how you build pride in a sport.
So now let's look at the next rule, because that they are also testing in Atlantic League, and that's the newest one of all. They are trying to move the pitching rubber back a little bit farther. Is going from 61 and 6 inches to 60 feet 6 inches. Sorry, from 60 feet 6 to 60 feet
61.
1, so that the batter can better see the ball. Now, uh, is the game about making the batter hit the ball better, or is the game about what it used to be? You sign on to play baseball the way it was meant to be.
Absolutely agree with you. But you and I both know why that argument is no longer valid. Because baseball, as an evolutionary sport, faced a reckoning back in the 1960s, right? When they moved that pitching rubber, they did it initially back when baseball was still grappling with the reality of a real power outage. Pitchers, quite frankly, were getting too strong, too great. Look at that era. Who did we have? Fergie Jenkins, Bob Gibson, Sandy Koufax. These were pitchers who were dominating hitters to the point where the game was literally struggling. It's an evolutionary thing. I agree with you, Ed. You shouldn't play around with the foundations of how you build your game. But if it reaches a point where you now can't, I mean, what's the league hitting overall in baseball? Like 230? I mean, we are literally at an existential crisis with baseball because the hitters have become so one-dimensional and are not being taught how to handle the bat at the plate, that the solution to this is to curb pitchers' talents by giving the hitters a better chance to hit. That's absolute lunacy. That's absolute lunacy, because no matter how great a pitcher is and how hard he throws, if you take the time to learn the fundamentals, you should be able to handle any pitch thrown your way. The fact that baseball is moving back the rubber, and even slightly, tells you that there's a great fear right now that there are just way too many hitters who have no bloody clue what they're doing at the plate. Look at the Blue Jays. There's only one hitter right now that I'm absolutely confident knows how to handle his pitches at the plate, and that's Bo Bichette. Bo Bichette is the only player on that team that when I watch his approach to the plate, I always feel like he's in control. Even when he misses a pitch that he's squared up on, you get the impression that he knew it was coming. He just missed it, which is more than I can say for the majority of hitters on that team. You watch guys like Vladdy and Teoscar, no matter how hard Vladdy's start is, at the end of the day, he's still closing his eyes and he hopes he hits that pitch hard. So here's baseball saying, we'll give you a little extra time to do it. We'll give you a split second to be able to get a better shot. But they have to do it, Ed. That's just the reality of the game. They did it back in the 60s. They'll do it again now. And who knows what will happen 20, 30 years from now when pitchers are throwing 110 miles an hour. Well, 100 miles an hour, remember when that used to be the standard mark that told you, my God, that pitcher's got talent? Well, now that's old news. Now you got to throw 105.
So, we were talking about COVID, and COVID is a reality. Whether it's sport, whether it's outside sport, but Major League Baseball hasn't found yet how to control it. By opening the stadiums to crowds and to different environments, we are seeing now positive results amongst cancellation of games due to. It happened to the Blue Jays yesterday. It happened the day before to the Mets and Marlins. And every day there is a game that is canceled because of COVID. they still haven't. And I said it last season when sports opened, that the way that the MLS Soccer League and basketball, the NBA did it, was the proper way to control the pandemic, because you had total control over where the players were and how they were working out. Uh, and Major League Baseball had a chance to do that this season, because they could have literally put all 30 teams into California, divided into the 4 cities, and that was it. And then you could have created
Hubs. You could have created hubs
hubs.
where you, and this is important, because you know me, I'm involved with the sports league. I work as a director for trying to figure out how to organize the best way to execute things. If you'd had a centralized hub in California, for example, where you can go ahead and take advantage of different teams circulating and organizing themselves, everyone stays within the hub. Sorry, I have an animal that just walked into the room. Then that would have been more effective, but they didn't. Did they even bother talking to other leagues? You think about the NHL and NBA, you wonder why couldn't they have all gotten together, all these major sports, and figured out how to create a standardized system? But they didn't. And now we have this mess, this hodgepodge. Look, when the Texas Rangers hosted the Blue Jays and put 40,000 in their stadium, I knew baseball was in trouble. Baseball has really no clue what they're doing, and I think it's going to come back to haunt them. Truly.
I mean, it's just sad, because if they don't want, I mean, you can lose valuable players for multiple times, because until they get vaccinated, all the league gets vaccinated, and that's not a sure science either.
Sorry, Ed, give me a second. Sorry, Ed, 1 second. Oh, shoot.
So, ladies and gentlemen, as we were, Ari's back now. The idea is that they have to get a handle on this, because you are going to lose some of the players of the league that actually make the league survive. Are making the league survive, like a Soto, like a Harper,
And what happens, God forbid, if one of them does get sick and ends up being sent to an ICU, or God forbid, imagine losing an athlete. I mean, you want to talk about a wake-up call to every league. Wait until there's a player who unfortunately is literally subdued by this, because the law of averages states that if they go ahead and continue these practices, I don't understand what baseball was thinking. Here they were stepping out. We talked about last week on your show how they took a political stand with the voter suppression issue. I'm all for Rob Manfred trying to be noble, but he's not a very smart leader in the end for allowing the league to operate the way it is. It's just too risky. Even when you control the environments the way the NHL has, as we've seen, there are variants. Look what happened to the Canucks in British Columbia. It's a real disaster, because not only has it completely rendered that team as being a non-participatory force now, but who knows what the fallout will be and how they're trying to, coordinate the league, schedule games, make sure that they're all played. I wish baseball had been smarter, Ed. Baseball hasn't been smart for many years, though. We criticize so many elements of the game. There's such an opportunity for them to be leaders. It's such a powerful sport. It's so influential. It attracts so much attention, but it's not run by smart people, either on the union head side or the executive ownerships being represented by Manfred. Clark and Manfred should have been smarter. They should have gotten together from day one and figured out how to create a schedule and a way of executing the season that isn't like this. And I mean, what can they do? They're playing in different states. Different states have different rules. Different provinces have different rules, as you and I well know.
Yeah, 100%. So another issue that is hampering baseball as a whole, and that goes from Major League Baseball to minor league baseball it's the idea that MLB and the ownerships are not investing the way they used to on the youth of the country. Baseball was the American pastime. at one point in time. Now you are seeing more kids turning towards the NBA because of the great promotion they do, the great programs that they run with the school systems and as a whole. You know, that was what baseball used to do. You used to remember. I remember kids going out in the summer and playing in competitive leagues. You know, Toronto has been known for Leaside, the famous Leaside baseball league,
That's right. That's right.
which now has is this has went from 16 teams to 8 teams because they don't have enough funding, and that's where that should have been concentrated. You know, the Blue Jays sponsoring leagues around the country to make that game expand instead of.
Well, but why would they do that? I mean, why would they really do that? It's not as if they're the only baseball team in the country. No way, they are the only baseball team. It's not as if they're owned by a powerful duopolistic media engine that could easily go from coast to coast and inspire people. Wait, they are a duopolistic engine. You see, there's so much hypocrisy here. I remember growing up as a kid in the 80s and being fascinated by what was known as baseball caravans. Do you remember that? You could go on a
Yeah,
baseball caravan, you could go to 14 different eastern US cities across the country and understand what it means to be a lover of the sport and also be inspired to participate in it, right? The Blue Jays came into existence here in Canada in 1977. They didn't win their first championship until 1992, but when they did, you saw the spike. You saw the interest in the sport. Same thing with the Raptors. They came in '96. They won in 2019. The interest in the sport spiked. With hockey, even though they haven't won anything in 54 years, they still have people interested in it. But they're not cultivating their game properly. That's the biggest problem with baseball specifically. It's abandoning its minor league systems. It's a joke down there. You and I both know that. The fact is that the players have had to pony up and step up to help the minor league system down in the States because major league owners are too busy worrying about their old bottom line and how much money they're losing during COVID. Here in Canada, there is no excuse why there can't be Blue Jays camps, facilities, and training facilities available in every single province in the country. Because if you were to do that, not only would you have this incredible surge of interest in the game, but you'd have young people, young men and women trying to play baseball. And that's something that's disappearing. It's evaporating. It's evaporating because of COVID, because we can't go outside and enjoy the parks. But baseball's not done a good enough job. And the Blue Jays have failed horribly that way. They can go and advertise how great their product is until the cows come home. The fact is, they're a team not comprised of young, emerging talent from Canada that made it to the show, but of a hodgepodge of highly incentivized, bonus paying athletes brought in from other countries. That's not the way you run a Canadian baseball club. And there are way too many ambassadors and good people here who love baseball who are really sad at the state of the game. They've got to up the ante here. They've got to be a better ambassador for people's imaginations, for children's desire to go out and become, what Tony Fernandez was or what George Bell was. And here on the modern stage, you've got so many young talents, right? Look at the nucleus of the Blue Jays. It's all about youth. And yet we're not seeing that message filtering down to the grassroots. And that's a big problem if you expect your game to continue thriving. It just won't. It's stagnating. Less people are watching it more than ever. Less people. And they're making more money than they've ever made before. That to me is, from a business perspective, that's sick. You're doing something very wrong if your revenue is going up, but the number of people who are enjoying your product is going down.
Yeah, I mean it's really really shameful.
It's greedy. It's a greedy sport. It's a terribly, terribly greedy sport.
But I also have to bring into the picture the idea of government funding because that's another place where we are not getting that funding. Baseball Canada as a whole is not being funded properly. And I understand that the government says we can fund every single sport, but don't I am not saying fund Baseball Canada as more than any other, but you see hockey and when you see how the government funds hockey and it's ridiculous. Like, I mean, they you put out when the hockey team goes to the Olympics or they go to the World Championships, it's a huge thing. They try to bring the biggest stars, and the Canadian government funds that, so that NHL athletes can go to compete.
The way you're supposed to promote a sport, which is to take the best and most legendary athletes in your sport who are no longer active in the actual professional level and get them to be ambassadors. I agree with you. Hockey does that extremely well because the hockey old guard cares about the future of the game. It's in their blood. With baseball, a lot of voices are drowned out, like you said, with excuses by the government that there are bigger priorities. Here in Ontario, the priority of building a redundant highway and spending billions of dollars on it far outweighs even putting a few millions of dollars into the grassroots side of things. Do you know how many baseball diamonds there are in Ontario alone? How many baseball diamonds have been constructed that are empty because kids don't have the resources, the facilities, the organizational capacity to have baseball in their lives? It's a terrible thing. There's no reason, first of all, why in this country we shouldn't have a franchise in Montreal and Vancouver. There is no reason. Both of those cities can more than adequately support a baseball franchise, and given the level of interest, they would thrive. Explain to me why neither city has what the Blue Jays have. Why are we unique to that? Why is it 2021 and there's one franchise in a country of 35 million people that presumably enjoy baseball and the tradition of baseball?
I mean, I'm, I always said that the discontinued the disenfranchising of the game of baseball by the feds and and also by the province, because the province doesn't give also funding to baseball. It's crazy because when you go to university, and that's part of one of the things as well, that there is no sports scholarships being awarded, and our kids have to go looking in the states to tier 3 or tier 2 colleges to be able to continue their endeavors to try to get to play professional baseball. And that's sad. That's sad because we are losing all the talent that we can create in this country. I went to University of Michigan. I am a product of the Leaside League. I went to University of Michigan because the founder of that league set up one of their scouts to see me, and ended up there. It's sad. I wish we could do more for the sport here, because we are going to lose a great tradition that actually was created in this country. It wasn't created anywhere else. It was created in Canada.
A tradition that is indelible in the minds of a lot of the generational folks who went through it. If you went through baseball in the 80s and 90s, you only have fond memories. You only have an appreciation for what Blue Jays did culturally. And the fact that the Expos were around and that we looked forward to them occasionally playing with each other, against each other in over Canada Day, the fact that the Expos themselves provided a lot of great narratives in a short time. Look, it will never be forgotten how the Montreal Expos lost their franchise. And that story itself, that horrible story of greed and opportunism, has expanded to the rest of the league and is the reason why, from a Canadian perspective, we're suffering. We should not only have a single franchise, and it shouldn't be a franchise that's run by a media company that is doing things like cutting radio accessibility. And basically it's elitism, isn't it, Ed? It's a form of elitism. It's saying we got this far and we're building off the ashes of what happened in previous generations. And it's literally that. I was in the Sky Dome a couple of years ago when they had the alumni there celebrating those World Series teams. And it was like being in a mausoleum. It was like being in a weird, odd museum of baseball memories, because the reality did not match anywhere near the sense of community and camaraderie generated by those players, by those management groups, and by the fans who love them. This, to me, these are like posers. These are like sports posers pretending to be altruistic in baseball, but not putting their money where their mouth is. And I know it's a pandemic, and I know, the bottom lines are being, I mean, the NHL, the NBA, they're losing hundreds of millions of dollars as a result of this pandemic. But baseball comes out and says, we're going to have a full season. We're going to put 40,000 people in the stands because we want to monetize this as much as possible before the medical risks are so great that we're going to have empty stadiums again. That's what this is. This is pure, shameful, unadulterated greed by both the Toronto Blue Jays and all these other leagues, these other teams who are not investing at the grassroots level. Minor league teams have players who are trying to make the show. They're not getting paid. They need players in the show to bail them out. That's an embarrassment. That's an embarrassment to a sport that I grew up with, that I've admired and care about so much. Very, very sad.
And with that, thank you. I want to thank you very much again for bailing me out in this show, and always enjoy having your company and your wisdom on many subjects.
I can give you my company. How much wisdom I give you really depends on the time of day. And hopefully what we talked about today, I know it sounds very bleak and sad, but it's important to talk about these things, isn't it?
100%. So I just want to remind everybody that this show can be heard as well on the Spanglish World Network, radio network, and its affiliates in social media. Remember to go to our website, SpanglishSportsWorld.com, for all the news. Remember, there you can read the stories by our hosts and our columnists with great talent, I have to say. And as well, remember, Spanglish Sports World. Watch it, hear it, read it, download it, but especially live it, because Spanglish Sports World is sport, and sport is Spanglish Sports World. In the name of my co-host Ari Shapiro and myself, Eduardo Harari, this has been Spanglish Sports World. We'll be back next week with more news, more commentary on what's going on in the world of sport and the world in general. Until then, please stay at home. Please stay safe in the company of your families during these pandemic times of COVID-19. Thank you. And until then, stay